throne, anyone with a large agenda rapidly realizes that their number one asset is time. And time is very limited and very precious. And so if Borgia needs to swing 3 votes by the next election, he can only talk to one person at a time. But he can talk to one person and send 2 other people to talk to the other 2 people on his behalf. And it doesn't matter whether those people have a vote or not.
So going into the second session, I think I was ready to pledge my troops to Milan because I was really afraid that it was going to fall to France and then my sister and brother-in-law would not have a duchy to rule. And then in return for that, Sforza was promised me that he was going to defend Ferrara if anything happened, and he was acquiring a lot of armies, so I felt a lot better about pledging my armies to him.
The King of France realized that I was getting pretty powerful, there was a high chance that I could become Pope, and that taking over Milan really wasn't worth it, especially when I was able to know the military forces that he commanded, and then I also, just because I knew it would influence his decision, gave away the military forces I had. I said, look, I am more powerful than you, so there's no point doing this, and there's a lot more point in cooperating. And if we signed a mutual pledge that said we wouldn't invade one another, then that's beneficial to the French too, given I'm actually now stronger than them. The end of the second session, I was very confident that day. I actually thought I was going to get elected then. So that was when, the day after that session, I had the most votes. I met with Borgia, Medici, Queen Isabella, and we all kind of hashed out a plan where I gave away some assets to the Spanish and to the Borgia, and they would swing their votes to me, which would give me enough to get elected.
The second day, Sforza came up to me and was like, vote for me. And I was like, okay, so I gave up on being Pope again.
As the second day went on, I was confident because although I was not being tremendously successful, the number of votes I had was still going up, so I was still confident that I was going to win the papacy.
Sforza was open to getting Borgia's support, but not giving all of his support away to elect Borgia. It got really complicated because the alliance that Sforza had kind of woven together was factions of Italians, Northern Romans, Central Italians, so it was a lot of them weren't comfortable with voting for a non-Italian pope.
Then Professor Palmer actually took us out for lunch and was like, no.
Really?
She's like, no. She was like, don't give up yet.
Basically, class ended and most people left. And there was a group of people still talking and kind of scheming and trying to figure out what's going on. This involved Isabella, Borgia, Medici was there. This was there. Some of the administrative staff, the person playing the Turk later, stayed. Our professor came with, and we ended up just. Professor Palmer took us out to lunch. She's like, you can continue plotting and scheming as long as you stay with me, basically. And so she took us, we went to the divination school, we got food, and we went out to the quad. So we just sat down in the quad and we were talking about how, basically we were vaguely making plans on, just a complete Sforza, domination. Just as we were starting to get to the point where Borgia was like, why am I giving into Sforza? I think I can win this. Sforza just walks up, and the plans were finalized that Sforza was just going to be Pope. And at that point, when he came up during that meeting, I was because I was still playing along his father, Dioneo. So I, pulled out the picture of Julia and was like, this is my cousin, she's very beautiful, she really wants to be the mistress of the Pope. Are you interested in a mistress at all? And he's like, no. And at that point I was like, okay, he can't be Pope. When I got home that evening, I had people I had contact information for was my brother, Medici, and Cesare. I had the schoolhouse trio. And so I wrote them and was like, we like shouldn't give in to Sforza. Like, why are we supporting him? I was like, look at the votes we have. Like, Borgia easily has like 7 votes right now.
Borgia was offering me more personal gain. He was going to make me vice chancellor. He was going to give me a cardinalship. He had a lot of benefices. Whereas Sforza, I felt like I developed a much more natural and solid bond of loyalty and friendship. So to get elected, Sforza was having to give away a lot of those benefices to get votes, so he couldn't promise me the vice chancellorship. He saw how the voting had been going, I guess, and it was like Della Rovere camp and Sforza camp. So he said, maybe we can bring one of the camps over to my side and I'll break the deadlock. So that was the first time, day 2, I guess, when he said like, hey, let's go for it. First step was like getting some of the monarchs on board. Spain was behind Borgia all along, so that was easy. But then I kind of started reaching out to both King Louis of France and the Holy Roman Emperor. They both seemed kind of open to backing whoever for Pope at that time. Once Borgia had King Louis and his few cardinal votes, me and a couple of my cardinal votes, and the Spanish monarchy behind him, it was easy enough to go to the Holy Roman Emperor with that and say, look, we're a hugely powerful entity. If you don't support us, you might as well, consider yourself destroyed because, you're going to go against the winning side. Better to get on board now while you're still able to influence people and have an effect and get in the good graces of this powerful faction that just formed, rather than refuse us and go against us, and then you'll be forced, to suffer the consequences.
He actually had 12 votes that we could swing in immediately for Borgia. And I was like, look at this, we just need to pick up a couple more votes. In the meantime, I didn't tell Borgia that I was a woman. I made it clear earlier. I approached him on the second day and was like, and I made it clear that I had a sister that was very interested in being the mistress of the Pope. And he seemed amenable to that. So he thought I was just this random, Farnese priest.
So the French faction moved because Louis is someone who's motivated a lot by resources. Because of that, it made sense to support a papal candidate who would promise us a ton of material wealth and armies and the like. And from what D'Aubusson was seeing at the time, that was turning out to exactly be the case. Borgia was offering a ton of great stuff to Louis.
D'Aubusson was gonna get the +3, and he wanted a cardinalship or something like that. It was it was a pretty good offer for the amount of votes. And then at the end, I got all the French votes except for one.
There was some stickiness about betraying Della Rovere in the beginning. Rumors abounded that Della Rovere was planning on backstabbing us before we would backstab him. So it really only made sense in a very moral kind of way for us to take the first, leap of faith and go ahead and, jump ship.
Borgia used his relationship with Alessandro Farnese to arrange for his son Cesare to become a cardinal.
Basically, I just kind of brought it up to Rodrigo. I said, hey, Dad, I should be a cardinal. I became a cardinal because they found evidence from the previous pope that he had signed me to be a cardinal right before he left, which legally would have made me a cardinal.
I also had Brother Agno, and he was he lived in Viterbo, which is the province that I was technically the lord of, and so theoretically had sworn fealty to me, and I was able to work with him He was a very valuable resource because he could forge documents. He made me a cardinal. That was probably the biggest thing. He was able to forge a cardinal in pectore scroll, which was essentially a document supposedly made by the late Pope that made me into a cardinal.
I had like votes of my people, specifically voting for Della Rovere and for Sforza, pretending like they were loyal to them. I also had people spying.
Sforza thought I was supporting him all along.
It also became clear that some of my closer allies who were kind of stretched in between, like Medici, were flaky as well, and I was getting worried about that. Which is why, kind of in day 3, I made the decisions I did, which was basically to support Borgia. I was getting worried about my position. I realized that I could still get what I wanted now, and with no risk, if I supported Borgia, and then, which was basically the papal armies. But then if, I kept trying to push for Pope, I could actually alienate myself and not get any of what I wanted. And so really becoming Pope now was a moot point. I had what I needed for Milan. I had done, most of my allies were with the Borgia in a way anyway, so it was better just to let him win. That's what I went with.
After Leo, I was like really pleased with myself. Things had worked out well. It looked like Florence was going to be firmly in my family's control. I had gotten some important pledges signed, so like as a player, I was personally pretty content. And my original alliance with Orsini, she was named to the council. Sforza was named to like the Pope's councils. Cesare and Alessandro and I, the 3 buddies from college, had all done well. Before the wars broke out, Borgia called a special meeting of his council. It was just me, the King of France, Borgia, and Cesare, and Borgia's top counselor, who turned out to be his mistress, Giulia Farnese, which was kind of a weird, awkward surprise for me. I walked into the meeting thinking I was the vice chancellor, realizing quickly that, well, he had gotten what he wanted from me, he had gotten my support. I had been relegated to behind Cesare, behind Giulia Farnese, behind King Louis in his kind of circle of confidants. So I had lost a lot of sway in that respect, and things just went kind of from bad to worse, where Borgia just naturally with the king started carving up Italy. They realized they had the most power. Nobody could really do anything to keep them in check. So it was going to be Spain and Borgia coming from the south, taking over central Italy and Rome and all of that. And France would take over the north, and they'd both have big kingdoms. I was kind of panicked. We got to the point that the King of France and Borgia were both about to sign a pledge. Then Borgia's reading over this pledge to not invade Florence, but he realizes, wait a second, this has to be firmly under the control of the Medici family. If it's a republic, I refuse to sign this pledge. So that's when I realized where I really stood. He wanted to put my family on the throne of Florence, just kind of as puppets. So then I walked away thinking, uh-oh, things are not looking good for Florence. I reached out to Sforza, letting him know things have not gone well. The French and the Spanish are just carving up Italy. Milan's going to be probably taken over by the French. Borgia's coming in from the south to invade central Italy.
Earlier in the simulation, a marriage alliance between France and England was broken with the startling death of the English heir, the future Henry VIII.
King Henry's main goal was to find a legal way to get a hold of France. That was his primary aim. So after he got the marriage alliance and got his son, the Prince of Wales, was engaged to the elder daughter of the King of France, and her dowry is literally listed as France. So he was very happy, and at that point, while that alliance was in place, then the King of England and the King of France were much more working together.
I got the dukeship from the Holy Roman Emperor, because I killed Prince of England. Well, the Holy Roman Emperor basically went up to me and said, how many assassins do you have? And kind of planted that seed on one day of the election. Then the next day, he asked me whether or not I could kill Henry, Prince of England. And I discussed it with Rodrigo actually openly, and he was the one who gave me the go-ahead to do it, and he provided me with some assassins. And I was promised a dukeship if I did that. I believe it was to disrupt the alliance between France and England so that the Holy Roman Emperor wasn't so threatened by that alliance.
A lot of the tension, I'm sure other people who you've interviewed have also talked about, it was Ascanio Sforza's campaign and then his eventual decision to side with Borgia. And that fascinated me in particular because it's very close to what happened in the historical reality. In that sense, this particular run was closer to the historical reality than any of the earlier ones, in that Ascanio Sforza, Cardinal of Milan, champion of defending Italy against its enemies, very ambitious, mid-career, in a very good military position, a veteran, son of a soldier, knows what's going on. Really strong potential papal campaign, though a bit younger than the main candidates, so that he's very easily able to put himself in a position where he can't quite win, but he sure commands a large enough voting bloc that whoever he throws himself behind does win. And in the actual historical election, he ended up throwing himself behind Borgia in return for Borgia making him vice chancellor. And in this version, he ended up throwing himself behind Borgia for a different bribe, but similarly. And then in both cases, immediately afterward, Borgia realizes, if I just betray Ascanio Sforza, all my problems will be solved. The French will love me and give me everything that I need. It will please Spain. It will give me the territory that I need. And I got to be at the special secret meeting that our Cardinal Borgia called on the Thursday between the third and fourth sessions, in which he just called together his lead counselors, the goal being just to decide the order of how people were going to be ranked in his cabinet. I think that was really his only goal, but he also invited the King of France. And I got to sit there watching them realize how much it benefits everyone to betray Ascanio Sforza, and they kept coming up with more reasons and more ways to betray Ascanio Sforza. And there was this assassination. Wait, if we frame Ascanio Sforza, then France can invade Milan, and Giovanni Borgia can attack central Italy, and we can carve this up like a cake. And Giovanni Leo de' Medici was there at the council because he was in favor with Borgia and had helped Borgia to the throne. And I just watched him getting paler and more scared as he watched this betrayal live happen. It was absolutely breathtaking.
During our 4.5 hour meeting, Medici misunderstood what I was saying. I had said that I will accept no one to be ruler of Florence except for you. If you don't become ruler, I will conquer Florence and make you ruler. He understood that as, I will conquer Florence if you don't. That's it. He missed the last part. So he decided to go to Sforza and be like, oh shit, this guy's gonna backstab me. Let's work together. I know you're pissed at him because he became Pope and not you.
We started scheming to maybe help out Italy and help out Florence and help out Milan. So we got together this mini alliance of me, Sforza, and D'Este, and we all came together to try and ensure peace, or at least not domination of Italy amongst the big powers.
So my understanding of what happened was basically the French needed a kingdom to carve out for Francois. Milan represented that opportunity with Genoa, who they had now backstabbed, so they had no disincentive not to go into Italy. The Borgia didn't want to fight the French, nor did the Spanish, so it was much easier to leave the Italians out in the cold. That meant betraying me. But now that I had given away my strongest asset, which was to get Borgia elected, I didn't really have anything more to offer. I was representing, I had a place on the council, but all I had was my own personal armies, all of which were going to be tied up defending Milan. So much better to just leave me to get destroyed by the French, right? From Borgia's perspective, the power of the French and the power of the Milanese will wipe each other out, leaving the Spanish the strongest in Italy, which makes a lot of sense. And the way that would be done is the French can accuse me of the murder, and just because of that implication, they're allowed to break a pledge. I got my letter response from Lorenzo de' Medici. He wrote back to me and said, this is basically your darkest hour, and like, how can I help? I plotted with him and the Sultan, and later Pietro Bembo, and also d'Este. We basically how to use the special asset from Lorenzo de' Medici, which was literally like whatever you want, within reason, right? No army of dragons or whatever. And that was proof of my innocence in the affair with Prince Henry's assassination, which would stop the French from invading me and accomplish my main goal of preserving Milan. So I also got in contact with the Ottoman Sultan, and we found common ground on the fact that the Crusader Knight d'Aubusson was on the Papal Council in my place, and that was obviously a huge affront to the Ottoman Sultan. So the Ottomans would, in exchange for trade rights with Milan and other northern cities like Ferrara and Florence, give me military support to defend myself and threaten to raid other areas of Italy. And I was able to capture 3 Borgia family members, including Juan, who was going to be the king of Romagna. And so that was really important to Cesare, because it's Cesare's brother, and it's Pope Borgia's son, who's going to rule like the state of the Borgia. So that agreement with Borgia was probably the most or the second most intense part of the entire papal election. Because basically I sat him down and very quickly everybody just started to listen, which was quite funny because this was meant to be a private meeting and people quickly realized something huge was going down. So it was basically him, Cesare, and myself, and I forced him to sign a pledge that limited Borgia attacks on Italy and preserved the independence of places like Pisa, Siena, Ferrara, Florence. It also meant that we would do a hostage exchange. I would get Ludovico, the Duke of Milan, back and give all 4 of my hostages back. And then also I would be restored to the Papal Council, and the Turk would pledge not to attack. The person who I meant to include but forgot to include was the King of France, who was going to sign that pledge as well, that they wouldn't attack me, which is why it nearly all fell apart later, because the King of France used that loophole, and right before armies were due, raised up, the cry that, oh, I assassinated Prince Henry, we're going to invade Milan. So I had a split second to get up there, and fortunately I had the same loophole in that I had never said I wouldn't read the evidence. That actually was... We certainly spoke about it, and I said, I won't reveal this, I threatened. But I never wrote it down, so technically the pledge couldn't be torn up by Borgia either, which he really wanted to do. And if my armies weren't turned in, they didn't do anything. And then Milan falls. So I had to get up and read it, just because the King of France was using the time against me. She got up specifically right at the last minute because, then I wouldn't have time to react. I wouldn't have time to get any new allies, I wouldn't have time to move my armies around, whatever. So that was why I had to basically get up and say it. The crisis was resolved after I declared this. I mean, Pope Alexander was furious, personally and in the game. Like, I was slightly worried because, he's bigger than me. But beyond that, he wanted to excommunicate me, tear up the pledge, ruin everything. And, I pointed out that he actually couldn't, because there was nothing in the pledge that said he couldn't. But I worked with him and I said, look, we'll figure this out, we'll reconcile this. So what I did is I publicly went up and reread the letter. I just read it how I would want to read it, because no one else was looking at this letter, and said, it seems to just implicate Cesare, but Pope Alexander was not involved at all. He had no knowledge of it and completely decried the act. So, I didn't blatantly lie such that no one would believe me if I said Cesare wasn't involved. I was only kidding, ha ha ha, right? No one's going to believe that. But I just put it on Cesare and cleaned off the Pope's name. And then I also went over and thoroughly bowed, etc. And after everyone turned in their armies, Dr. Palmer asked me if I wanted to do something else, because nobody bothered to attack Milan, and there was a huge army there. And I said, why don't we take them all to Genoa then, and help Cardinal Gentili, who was going to lose. Part of my goal is to do right by my allies. So I did that. I didn't realize that was going to result in the expulsion of the Della Roveres. Cardinal Riario has specifically asked me if I was going to take any sides in the Civil War, and I said no. But I only then got the opportunity to betray afterwards. And it was very split second. And I don't know if I had been given the option to exile or not, if I would have exiled Della Rovere. I probably would have negotiated and said, what will you give me not to exile you?